Hi everyone. Uh, Hello and good afternoon and welcome to live session 12 for the course NPTEL course I think biology. I am Arpit. I'm from ISC. I'll be your TA for this session, and basically this is the last session. So here are some important links before we begin. So first is the live session link, which is the meeting that link that is going on currently. Then we have the YouTube link where all the recordings for all the live sessions will be updated, and the Google Drive link where all the PPTs that you are seeing here will be updated. We'll start with lecture 59, Biology and Society. Sorry. So this was actually a interviews discussion kind of uh, lecture. So I think all three, there are two interview and discussion sort of lectures, and one first one on biology and society, then science and art, and then basically one case study on feral dogs, and then basically we have the course wrap up. So we'll go through that. First is the discussion session with Dr. Suel Kader and Biology and Society. So I highly recommend you guys to go and check out this week's all of these discussion videos because they are quite good and they'll help you uh, understand or uh, what you say, uh, think more than just looking at what we are doing here, which is basically just a summary of the whole thing. But having a following the logical sequence of the discussion would help you guys uh, more in a way to basically think more properly about these kinds of topics, right? So, uh, first, one section of the discussion was about biology education in schools, where Suhail talked about uh, basically that biology is not uh, science where you are basically memorizing facts, but what you are also doing is you're like all other sciences, what you're basically doing is you're collecting a sorry, you're collecting a set of observations and you're basically having some conceptual theory based underpinning, which helps you tie all these observations and facts together, right? And basically, biology affects society in a large manner, mostly in two major ways. The first thing is biotechnology, the development of biotechnology and its consequences. For example, now we have genetically modified crops, which can be grown to have very high yields in very uh, unfavorable conditions, right? Similarly, you have genetic engineering that helps us basically uh, carry out a lot of things. And now we have basically gene therapy, which basically helps us make gene edits in like small children or infants to basically um, um, prevent genetic diseases from happening. Right. And the other way in which biology makes a large change on society is basically by talking about things such as climate change, and basically because biology deals with complex systems, it has a kind of a view, a kind of a way to basically uh, figure out things such as the uh, causes and the consequences of climate change, how it will affect the globe, and basically it's not just exactly biology, but it's also a bit of interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary kind of a thing where basically a lot of different things have to come together to provide for solutions. But then, even then, also, for example, like if we say that climate change is happening and things are happening, and there's basically, what do you say? Uh, one uh, one thing that people say, which is that basically renewable energy. So we should everyone basically uh, what is it? Uh, talk Try to promote renewable energy, and that will help us deal with climate change. But even this renewable energy, there has been research to show that things such as wind farms and all are negatively affecting the globe. For example, mm, different organisms that are present in and around. So, for example, wind farms tend to damage bird populations that are present near the wind farms, and which in turn leads to a higher increase in the amount of lizard population, right? Or small reptile population in these areas. So, things like this, even though renewable energy is renewable in the terms that it does not chemically pollute the atmosphere, it does affect it ecologically. And basically, biology helps us, uh, what do you say, uh, talk about all these effects and figure out like what, what all will be the consequences of climate change and how we can figure out solutions to deal with it. Right. So what Suhail's whole point was that uh, since biology affects the society in such a large manner, school curriculum needs to reflect that, and it's not more about basically being more informed about biology, but being more informed about basically the process of thinking, the process of science, right? And uh, basically that's what he said that, uh, for example, uh, students should be able to think about uh, what do we know and how do we know it, right? Or basically, if I tell you that the earth is not flat, the earth is round, you should be able to question me. Why do I think it's round? Why do I think it's flat? And like based on what I say you should be able to basically figure out a way to determine if I'm saying right or wrong, or basically think about it and say that if it is possibly right, possibly wrong. So basically, these kinds of thinking patterns and discussions about these things should basically be permeated in schools. And because like most individuals go through or ought to go through education and at least basic schooling, and this is what would help them become like what do you say, mm, independent thinkers and develop critical thinking skills. Right. Then they talked about basically how does Suhail basically envision biology education at the college level, and so basically some of the points that were discussed is that people specialize too soon. So basically, specializing during bachelor's is quite early, probably because you need to have a broad view of a few more disciplines, a few more related things, so that you can basically figure out something novel and uh, what do you say? Uh, it basically provides you the complementary knowledge to basically deal with other things, right? And uh, the other thing is basically they talked about how philosophy should be taught in more detail in college. For example, what is reality? What is the nature of reality? How do we generate knowledge? How do we know that the knowledge generated is reliable and so on and so forth? So these kinds of things basically give a healthy dose of skepticism uh, in people and basically make them question about things such as their own work or basically the underpinnings of the field that they're trying to study. And this basically helps breed better think. Okay. So the thing that he suggested was basically have a broader vision for biology even in college. And for example, have a UG degree in biology with a major and a minor in other subjects. For example, major in one branch of biology and minor in, for example, let's say a related thing or an unrelated thing, doesn't matter. Right. And then they talked about basically what can we say about the decision making regarding science in India. And so basically what happens is on the country level, the government of India has basically these committees and all who basically would have a lot of scientists, politicians, and other such kind of people representing, and basically they have developed or evolved strategies or priorities on where our country should be spending research money, and basically that basically decides the broad kind of funding for various disciplines that is assigned by the government, and that kind of drives uh, what kind of research is more favored, because if the government wants to fund research in AI, and basically your lab is or you want to research in AI, then it's good for you, and more people like you will basically start applying, start doing it. But if the government does not want that, then basically people like us won't basically be able to secure money, and like uh, might not be able to complete our work, right? So basically, the broad kind of funding in a way drives kind of research that goes on in a place. But the other thing is on the individual level, basically. Uh, What happens is, since science is done by individuals at the grassroots levels, at the levels of where science is basically executed, where things go on, basically it is determined by basically what uh, the person who is undertaking the project wants to do. Right, and it's upon them to basically figure out funding and try to do that. So, for example, people I don't want to go into examples here, but basically, uh, people who want to work on something that is not exactly related to AI currently, and let's say the government is funding research in AI, doesn't mean that that kind of research won't happen. It's just that some people might be able to still find funding and basically be able to do that. And the other thing is basically the kinds of questions that we ask and the kinds of experiments, the kinds of things that we do are also influenced by the individual worldviews that we might have because of our upbringing, because of our schooling, because of other things, right? Our individual biases. Uh, so, for example, one example that Phil gave was that in behavioral ecology, a lot of people earlier, generally male scientists and researchers, what they did was they asked a lot of questions regarding male species, not male species, basically male organisms of different species. And therefore, there was a big literature on basically male aggression and all those kinds of things. But after like a long time, after some time, when women researchers started to work there, what they did was basically they started asking similar questions about females. Because maybe because of their individualistic upbringing, maybe because of their worldviews, maybe, yeah, so they bring a different kind of perspective into the whole thing. And basically that's why people started looking at both these things, and they found out that there were also obvious kinds of things. For example, he gave an example of where black bugs, basically male black bugs, fight with each other for female attention, but in the same way females also fight with each other for male attention, and that fact was always forever ignored when there were only male researchers working in the field. But when women researchers came into the field, what started happening was they also started talking about all these things. So what basically happens is uh, we need all these different kinds of people with different kinds of backgrounds and worldviews and upbringing to basically come forward and basically do science in different fields so that we get many different perspectives, right? And yeah, the next thing is they talk about basically the practice of biology in India. Should we be asking questions similar to other countries such as the US, France, or other European countries, right? So what happens here is basically Phil talks about the difference between so there are two kinds of science. One is basically applied science and the other one is basically basic science. So what he says is basically applied science in a way should be very driven towards what we currently want. For example, a developing country like India would have more need for certain kinds of things compared to a developed country like the US, right? So for in that case, the kind of experiments, the kind of science that should be happening should be basically what do you say? Uh, the kinds of projects that should be undertaken should basically be decided based on what are the growth goals of the country, right? But on the other hand, for basic science questions, for example, things that pick our curiosity, things that basically are more general about like life and a little bit more abstract and not exactly directly applicable. These kinds of things, kinds of questions should be similar in different kinds of places. But the thing is, like the one difference that he pointed out between science carried out abroad and science carried out here is that abroad there's not a lot of money, shortage of money for research, and that's why what happens is basically for every experiment, they want to basically pick out the best instrument and basically carry out the experiment and basically try and figure out what's happening. But in the case of India, since there's a huge lack of funding in research, what happens basically is that people have to do jugaad. People have to basically figure out creative ways to basically make their experiments work. Right. And that's why we have a lot of these, as we say, necessity is a mother of invention. So basically, because we have the need here, we basically try and become more creative in the way we ask questions and the way we try to devise our experiments. Right. Then the second thing he said is again comes back to the initial point that we discussed, which is that basically the we should be having discussions and starting to basically teach people in schools, students in schools about the process of science. So science is not exactly what he says. Science is not exactly a what do you say? It's not a set of facts, but or it's not just information. What it is exactly a process, right? Talking about the process of science, getting to know how information is generated, how we can carry out experiments, and how we can question things and devise experiments. So that's so these kinds of thinking, critical thinking skills should be started to be developing in like schools and even colleges. Great. The other thing is basically things such as citizen science projects might be a good way to basically initiate these kinds of discussions in schools and colleges. Basically, some scientists, what they do is they basically collect, use normal citizens of the country to collect the data. So that's basically what they'll do is they'll try to figure out simple things that everyone can notice. For example, let's say you're a birder, let's say you like to look at birds and I can identify a few birds. So basically what people can make you do is basically if they develop an app or something. So basically if there is something like this, which is called the Great Backyard Bird Count, which is basically by eBird. So that's a yes organization. So what it that's from a lab in the US. So basically, what they do is basically they have this thing called Great Backyard Bird Count. So what they do is they ask birders all across the globe to basically see in their backyard what are birds are there and basically what how many birds they can figure out and so on and so forth and basically update that. And based on that, they can do census on bird populations and things like that. So such kinds of projects where basically you have to do something that is quite accessible to like normal people without like a lot of scientific knowledge or input required. So these kinds of projects can be encouraged both in schools and colleges so that people can participate and think about more about the process of science and basically how science is carried out and so on and so forth. Right. The other thing that they talk about is basically when we are looking at nature, basically when we are looking at nature, deriving examples and doing things. So are we doing that to basically rationalize our own actions? Right. So, for example, let's say we say something is natural. So basically, that thing, it means it's good. It's something that's supposed to happen. Right. So this natural word that basically comes from looking at nature, observing other animals and creatures. Right. So this generally, so I pointed out that it basically refers to what is called as a naturalistic fallacy, which is basically what is dictates what ought to be. So basically, how do we know that the current thing that is happening is not biased in its own way or is not harmful in its own way? But just because we saw that and just because it is present, and that means it should be the way. And so that kind of thinking is very problematic. And the second thing is nature is not very unitary. So basically, what happens is if you find something, for example, if you find some bird basically eating mammals, you can also find and that does not make a lot of sense. But basically, what I mean to say is basically you can find often opposite patterns in different, in basically similar kinds of things, right? And I'm falling short of an example right now, but what's happening is basically in nature, even if you find something which is, uh, what is it? For example, one example would be uh, uh, lions basically who go and do infanticide when they basically take over a pride. They basically kill the children of the pride that are present, the cubs of the pride, and basically then they meet with the females again so that they ensure that their uh, sons or daughters, their basically cubs are basically surviving. Right. So that is basically nature working at the level of an individual, and basically one thing that we can say from this is that maybe it's good to have individualistic thinking or something. Right? That's oversimplification, but forgive me for that example. But yeah, so that's something that we might be thinking that maybe the best thing to do is think about yourself or like the best thing to do is ensure this, that, whatever. But on the other hand, if you look at it in like social creatures and for example, honeybees and all that, there you see that even like, what do you say? The opposite kind of thing, which is altruism, where basically others are giving down their life to protect you, even when they are not able to give children, or basically them not giving children because they want to take care of your children. So things like that. So that kind of usociality kind of thing basically is opposite to what we saw before. And basically, that kind of tells you that in nature, if you find something, you will most likely be able to find an example of the opposite also happening, right? And basically, this does not tell you anything about what should be and what should not be. Right. So what we are doing is basically we would have some kind of bias, and we are basically then cherry picking what kind of examples we like from nature and talking about that. So all that this is doing is basically drawing less, thinking that it's drawing lessons from nature, but all it is doing is amplifying and justifying our own thinking that we had from there. Right. So the next part was about scientific temper and belief. Right. So basically, where we talked about religion, science, and basically having different kinds of beliefs and so on and so forth. So basically, we all, in a way, we all hold contradictory beliefs. There might be some might be very overly easy to detect or determine. Some might be very difficult to figure out because they are quite deep within us. So what is basically happening is that we have a lot of contradictory beliefs, but sometimes we are able to not identify that we have, but almost everyone has contradictory beliefs, right? So what Sohail says is that basically religion and science, some people believe that religion and science can be uh, seen as like two domains of things, two ways of looking at the world, if you will. And basically, they are two non-overlapping domains. So the kinds of questions that science asks or the kinds of things that science asks is different from the kinds of questions that religion asks, or the kinds of things that religion says. Right. So that's why they can function, even though they are contradicting, they can function in a way. But other people claim that the domain of religion is decreasing because whatever like physical claims that the religion is making, people are trying to find scientific evidence for or against it, and often find evidence not in favor of that. Right. So that was it for the first discussion. The second one was with Dr. Ipsa Jain, where basically they talked about art and science, and basically they started off with talking about the history of art and science teaching in India. So basically, there was a common way of looking around the world at us around us, and basically there's not a lot of differentiation between science and art and so on and so forth. Mm, and she gave examples of like Maria Sibylla Merian, for example, who was like an artist, and she basically uh, had some training in biology, and basically not an artist, but like yeah, self taught artist, I guess. And basically, she started looking at insects and wanted to draw their life cycles and so on and so forth. And that's how she discovered that basically caterpillars are the things that are turning into butterflies, and butterflies don't arise out of anywhere, they come out of caterpillars. Right. Similarly, she talked about Galileo and how his uh, experience in basically drawing, how his interest in drawing basically made him describe uh, lunar surface by drawing it instead of basically being unable to describe it because of lack of words, which is what I had to most of his contemporaries when they were also looking at the moon, right? And basically, industrialization has basically led to the development of science as a degree, science as a different branch of understanding knowledge is a degree, very different branch of differentiating, basically. And basically, in recent terms, what has happening is what has been happening is that the way in which images are generated in science has changed quite a lot. For example, earlier when Maria was working, for example, you could just go around and draw things. You can just draw illustrations of things and so on and so forth. But nowadays, what people are doing is since they're working on like microscopic things, they're working on very large things. So what they're doing is for generating these images, what they're doing is basically they are using computers, using basically microscopes and so on and so forth. Right. So there's a kind of slight barrier that's coming in. Right. And most of these things are basically not. Uh, so that's the kind of thing that we talk about later. So she talked about basically her program, which is called, or basically her mm, initiative, which is called a Fistful of Mud, which was basically their effort to see that if they can create tools of engagement for people to engage with inquiry in public space. And they wanted to do this by using mud because mud was available everywhere. And basically, it's yes, it can be molded into anything and so on and so forth, right? And then she talked about like one of the students, Prabha, coming up with a board game that is based on scientific discussion. And basically, they wanted to see how this idea can be made accessible to a larger community and can they make it a collaborative thing across space and time, right? And basically, IPSA was the one who basically put all the banners and illustrations for the, I think, biology. And basically, then she goes on to talk about her inspiration for that. I think this is a part that you should actually go and listen to. I just mentioned in brief what all things she talks about, but basically, I won't explain it. Go back and listen to it. She talks that basically, the when drawing the illustrations for the book, she tried to be basically approachable so that people don't find it very difficult to do the same drawings or replicate the same drawings. Right, there should be some sort of approachability so that people are also getting engaged in that. And basically, uh, the other thing that she talked about is basically observational learning. So, what happens often is like uh, what we draw is generally what we have seen in books. Right. We don't generally draw what we actually see in nature. And that kind of brings in a lot of issues, as she said, and basically uh, people forget to basically learn about observational things, right? And basically, for example, instance in a class, if you imagine two people trying to draw the same thing, for example, the heart or something, and to the 5 10 people trying to draw the same thing, they might draw it uh, in a very similar way, which is according to what they saw in a book. That is case one. The case two, which is basically most likely to happen, which is case two. If you have a heart in front of you or something, you basically look at the heart and they draw it, and in that way you can see that all 5 of them might not see the heart in the same way. There might be subtle differences in the way they are looking at it, and that might lead to a lot of inquiry, a lot of thoughts about okay, what am I observing, what are other people observing, and why is that, and so on and so on. Right. Then at last, we talked about basically what are the different kinds of opportunities for students in India regarding who are basically interested in both science and art and want to have a career in basically things such as illustration or basically doing art that uh, in science, right? So this part also, I think it's better if you go and talk, like look at the video. If you're very interested, I would suggest try and uh, uh, contact Dr. Lipsa Jain. And basically, what she said is that people like her often like some people do it via self-practice. They look at things that try to improve themselves, or basically some other people can also basically pursue a degree in illustration or graphic design after like having a bachelor's in like science or something. And basically you can try and approach illustrators like her and try to reach out to them and maybe ask them for training opportunities or like short projects that you can do with them, things like that, and using that basically build your portfolio. If you have drawing skills, show it off. Great. Then basically talking to media houses, for example, that work with the science, science community. For example, we have our Office of Communications here in ISC, right? So talking to these media houses or basically these institutions that might be or these parts of institutions that might be present in the places such as museums and all, media houses and museums, talking about them, basically talking to them and basically what do you say? See, seeing if you can get a job or a project with them or a position with them. Right. The other thing is basically freelancing and working with other collaborators, basically share your vision. And basically, you can make something and you can try to sell it, things like that also. Or you go illustrate a book for someone, then you basically illustrate something else for someone and so on. Right. So that was it for the last lecture. In the next one, we're again talking about biology and society, and now it's about a case study on stray dogs. Right. So basically, why stray dogs I start talking about? It's because there's a lot of news around dog bites, infant killings by dog, and basically the most kinds of things are more serious concerns in developing countries such as India. Right. So stray dog populations are generally attracted to basically urban areas, and that is because there's a lot of resource that is available to them. For example, in many places we have these bakeries, meat shops, and garbage that is thrown around. And what is basically happening is that bakeries, meat shops, and basically garbage that is thrown around, which basically provides for like search for food for these animals. So what happens is they are drawn towards these places, and basically in a urban area, let's say we have the core zone, which is the most developed zone, which is basically where development has almost happened, and there's no more space for making things. And then there are like other zones which are like near this core zone. So, for example, these peri-urban zones, which are basically on the border of the urban-rural area, for example, are more susceptible than the core zones to be affected by things such as wild dogs or stray dogs coming in and encroaching on space or coming and growing in large numbers because these kinds of places, because in a rural landscape, the dogs might not get food that easily. And when these kinds of things open up, these kinds of places open up, what happens? They get food quite easily, so they try to be come there, right? And basically, what happens is they then affect human populations. For example, a lot of dogs bite and humans bite and eat infants. They attack sheep and cows and other kinds of things. Even like domestic dogs that are especially present in like peri-urban areas where there's basically some parts of areas where your dog can go into the forest, go into the woods and come back. Basically, what happens is they go into the forest and even they engage in like dog wildlife conflicts where they basically go and affect these populations of like native bird species or hunt for birds or basically other kinds of things, and they lead to like higher levels of disease transmission from one uh, because they are known to carry a lot of ticks, a lot of fleas. So what happens is when they encounter other wild animals, they transfer them to them, and so on and so forth. And disease transmission is also a thing that happens. Then basically, uh, on the positive side, if you look at dog populations, what happens is they provide a kind of mental satisfaction and recreation to human beings that we don't get from other places, especially in urban areas where we are already mentally so much frustrated. Then they serve as important scavengers in the urban ecosystem. Right, they can scavenge for basically they eat whatever is left over, and basically they are known to control things such as rat populations and other pests which might be causing disease or having it. So to control basically dog populations, what they are suggesting, what they're thinking about is basically, for example, in the case of Mumbai, you have the Sanjay Gandhi National Park where there are a lot of leopards. So these leopards basically naturally keep the dog population in check in nearby areas, near the national park. But on a logical scale, on a more uh, what do you say, doable scale, what they say is basically continuous monitoring and management of these populations is basically the way in which we can control these populations. So basically neuter these stray dogs and basically monitor them. Basically, even if you neuter a stray dog, even if you don't monitor them, there might be wild dogs that might be coming in and inseminating them and basically leading to more progeny, right? So, neutering these dogs and basically monitoring them, seeing that if they're getting disease, then putting them down and things like that would help us manage these populations. Right. So that was it about lecture 61. Next, we'll talk about nature relatedness. So basically, here courses are basically talked about uh, all these things that we talked about in these three lectures, which is biology, Dr. Suel Kader, we talked about the first thing, biology and society, then we talked about science and art, Dr. F. Sajan, and then the case study on feral dogs in urban India. And basically, then we started talking about why are we talking about nature relatedness, right? So basically, all these kinds of things draw on to the fact of basically nature relatedness or how related we are to nature, what should be our standpoint, viewpoints on nature, and things like that. Right. So basically, climate change and basically biodiversity collapse are basically happening because of nature-human relationship because we are affecting nature in a very significant way. And so we need biology and ecology to understand how do we correct this relationship. And we have two kinds of duties to do. One is as human beings, where basically we are being affected by this kind of thing. Our species is going to go towards extinction because of this kinds of events and thinking. And as students of biology, we need to be asking why these kinds of things are happening and how it is affecting other populations of the animals and how they are dealing with it and things like that, right? So basically, nature relatedness can be a way for people to start looking at biology because basically, even though we might be familiar with these kinds of things, for example, the ecology of marine fungus, how it happens, what they eat, and so on and so forth, or things such as the natural water cycle or the carbon cycle or nutrient cycles and so on and so forth. So these kinds of things might not be accessible to the general public. So one way to basically promote these kinds of things is basically making them understand that how related to they are to nature, us thinking that how related we are to nature, why we are related to nature, and then promoting that kind of thinking on other people also helps them think about okay, nature is important, we should conserve nature and basically take environmentally more conscious decisions, right? So uh, basically, this is another question that was asked in the lecture. Basically, that the idea of ecosystem services is one way of thinking about nature in urban areas? Are there other lenses through which we can view nature? Right. So, for example, ecosystem services are things that are provided by the ecosystem to us as benefits that we get from them, free service, if you may. And basically, is it that's one way of looking at basically think about nature in urban areas. What are other kinds of ways we can think about ethics, attitudes, and values as applied to natural environment, as opposed to human needs and the want? Right. So this is the kind of thing that you want to do, that you going to want to basically instill in other people. Right. Similarly, E.O. Wilson, who is one of the recognized scientists, eminent scientists, has basically told that from infancy we are basically uh, happy on ourselves and with other organisms, and we are very drawn towards life, and we can easily distinguish life from inanimate, and we are basically drawn towards it like moths are drawn towards light. Right. Similarly, there's another person, Rachel Carson, she basically told that we still have not become mature enough to see ourselves as a very tiny part of a vast and incredible universe, and a universe that is distinguished above all else by a mysterious and wonderful unity that we flout at our parents. Right. So basically, she was also another person who tried to make people look at. Gave her views on these things. And then basically we have Gandhi, basically who talked about that the earth has enough for everyone's need, but not for everyone's greed. So his ideas on development, on technology, and on self-sufficiency, basically Swaraj and his other things basically show his deep thinking about the nature-human relationship, even wearing fardis and so on and so forth, right? Then we talked about basically this Sundarlal Bahuguna, who was one of the people on the forefront of this Chipko movement in Uttarakhand, where basically these women basically hug trees so that to prevent contractors from cutting down these trees because the trees were sacred to them. So basically, here they started discussions about ecology as a permanent economy. So basically, talking about economic terms in ecology. And nowadays, basically, what we see is not can be debated that we are currently in the capitalism, which is the age of the capital, where basically capital is the transformation of money into commodities and vice versa. And it is a process in which money basically flows through nature. And basically, capital supposes infinite expansion with it a finite web of life. So, this is what basically this is more from this book. It's saying it's quite a nice read if you want to read. And basically, it talks about basically the rise of capitalism with the industrial revolution, and but that capitalism as a process started much earlier. So colonialism is also a side effect of capitalism, and it's basically one of the drivers of capitalism. And basically, the establishment of a system of supply and mobilization of labor on a planetary scale has led to basically the development of capitalism. Right. Then there are different pillars of capitalism. For example, laissez-faire economy, which is the free market, limitless growth, limited government intervention, private property, self-interest, competition, and freedom of choice, and how basically these lead to basically uh, uneven social hierarchical structures. And basically, people have also predicted that the domain social paradigm for capitalism, or basically which is the collection of norms, beliefs, values, and habits that are formed and basically form the worldview of most of the people in or is commonly handled within a culture. So that is known as the dominant social paradigm. So the dominant social paradigm for capitalism is that individuals are more important than communities. We should look at our own benefits, and private ownership often over common ownership, right? And the importance of material goods or consumerism and over relationships, and basically humans are separated from nature. Right. Then there's this other way of thinking where basically uh, we're talking about nature relatedness. So, in which we are basically trying to include nature as a part of ourselves, right? So, we can have different kinds of different levels of nature relatedness based on all these kinds of images that you see, basically, how close we think we are to nature. So, for example, things like it starts from like the cognitive component is that is nature a part of ourself? Then affective component, which is basically are we concerned for nature? And basically, the behavioral component is whether we take the time to basically act in interest of nature. So these kinds of things basically start to include nature in your sense of self, and basically that helps you track your nature relatedness, right? Uh, so there are these questions which basically are asked to determine the nature relatedness scale, where basically stronger natural relatedness is associated with greater happiness, better mental and physical health, and an ecologically sustainable behavior. Right. Mm. So basically, I would suggest you guys to go to the I think biology textbook online and basically go to this section in Urbenscapes where you do this exercise, which is nature awareness booster. Right. Go and please do that and basically see how it makes you feel. Right. And basically, what they're doing is basically go around and basically observe things. And you don't need to have an agenda of what you're going to do, what where you're going, or maybe the next time you take a walk, you just look around and see what is happening in nature, right? And basically have a journal with you. For example, here people have kept journals and basically try to replicate things that they have seen, or basically talk about things that they have experienced or thought about when they were going on walks, like right. Then basically. Nature relatedness is again basically a way forward is to look at indigenous cultures because there are people who are basically represent 5% of the world's population but conserve around 80% of the world's biodiversity because they see as forests, they see as uh, nature as a part of them, as a part of their community, and for them to basically grow with nature. So they have these things kinds of ancient paradigms or kinds of thinking that they have, and basically, in new terms, these can be defined as degrowth, ecofeminism, eco-socialism, and many more. And basically, the way forward is to look at how they integrate nature into them and see if that is sustainable. Right. So that was it for this class, this lecture. Does anyone have any questions? I'll wait for a few minutes if anyone has any questions. We'll get started with practice assignment number 12. So we have very few questions this week. So the first thing is the two main ways in which biology can impact the society are dash and its consequences, and dash and how a complex system responds to these changes. Right. So option A, biology and society. Option B, biotechnology and climate change. Option C, sustainability and society. Option D, sustainability and climate change. So the answer here will be biotechnology and climate change. And what we are basically doing here is saying that the two main ways in which biology can impact society are biotechnology and its consequences, and climate change and how a complex system like the Earth responds to these changes. Right. The second question is identify the statements that are least acceptable. A, good science can only be done in good and expensive funding support. Science is evidence based and often considered not to overlap with religion. Citizen science is an innovative way of undertaking science processes, scientific processes, and knowledge sharing. Innovative and good science can be done without technology and just by observation, although technology enhances the quality and practice of science. Right. So least acceptable means we are trying to find the thing that is least acceptable. So the answer here will be uh, A, because rest of the things are more acceptable than basically accepting that good science can only be done with money. The third question is how does Dr. Suhail Kadir suggest bridging the gap in biology education at the college level? So basically, A, advocating for highly specialized master's degree in specific biological field. B, encouraging a more interdisciplinary approach and introducing philosophy alongside science. C, promoting a strict segregation of disciplines to maintain academic record. And D, limiting biology education to theoretical knowledge without a practical application. So the answer here would be B, encouraging a more interdisciplinary approach and introducing philosophy alongside science. The next question is why is integrating biology and arts important in scientific education and communication? A, it adds aesthetic appeal but lacks substantial scientific value. B, it creates a bridge between scientific understanding and public engagement. C, it complicates scientific concepts, making them harder to comprehend. D, it solely serves the purpose of artistic expression without aiding scientific expression. So you know that all three of these are false, and the answer is basically it creates a bridge between scientific understanding and public engagement. And basically, art or based on science or art about science can promote scientific thinking in northern populations, can help people think, have a scientific, develop a scientific temper, and look at things in a more scientific way. Which of the following best characterizes individuals with high nature relatedness? A, preference for indoor activities and urban environment. False. B, interested in growing indoor plants while showing no interest in going outside in nature. False. Reduced interest in biodiversity and ecological preservation. False. Strong emotional connection with and appreciation for natural environments. True. Fear and avoidance of natural landscapes. False. So the answer here is D, strong emotional connection with and appreciation for natural environments. So that's how you know that your nature relatedness is high. So that was it for this week. Does anyone have any questions? Please feel free to ask if you guys have any questions. Otherwise, we'll stop here after some time. Actually, I'll be here for some time since this is the last class. If any one of you wants to basically ask anything about um, any of the previous classes, any doubts regarding any of the previous week lectures, that's also fine. Feel free to ask. Yeah, so if anyone has any questions or doubts, feel free to ask. Feel free to ask anything about previous uh, lectures or today's lecture or anything. Okay, guys, we'll stop here. I'll talk to you guys probably not in the foreseeable future, or hopefully we'll have a last class where we'll go over everything. Uh, Thank you. So today we discussed about week 12 lectures, and I'll be uploading all of these files for go through. Thanks. Bye.